Oh, for pedestal, we had not only a Bofors gun of our own to replace the old 12-pounder, but we had a couple of Bofors guns set up on deck, which were actually cargo for Malta. And we had them set up on deck as well. We had, I think at that stage, 8 Oerlikon guns, which are 20 millimeters, something we hadn't had before. And we also had a thing called a pig trough, which was about 20 rockets with 2 pound of TNT in each one. These were set up to fire vertically over the ship. And we had a special Navy crew to man this lot. There was also a thing called a pillar box, which was like a pillar box with a slit in it, except there was a man inside looking out of the slit. And on either side of the pillar box were 10 of these rockets, again with 2 pound of TNT in the head of each one. I mean, this was steerable, and I don't know they had any great success. I don't know whether they frightened anybody. The most frightening thing that happened would be a misfire, because with one of these rockets fizzing just outside the door, the man inside the pillar box didn't know whether to stay or go. So that could be a thing. I think we thought we'd shot down an aeroplane on one occasion, but it's very difficult to tell with these things. Very often in a convoy, if you've got a low-flying attack coming in from one side, then the Commodore will have time to hoist emergency turn to starboard, and everybody will alter course 45 degrees the same way, and then another perhaps 45 degrees, so you've turned around 90 degrees in a matter of a few minutes. And again, you've got to think back that these were the 1940s. The Navy had big red flags and big black flags, and they were big, you know, several tablecloth sort of size. And just the same as in Nelson's day, if the outside destroyer screen saw something, then they hoisted a big red flag or a big black flag, and they fired a gun to attract attention, which, you know, is what they've been doing for centuries. And you would know then that the attack was coming from that direction, which would give the Commodore time to give the orders to swing the whole thing round. Didn't always happen in time, of course, but it could be done.
When you arrived in Malta, did you stay on the ship, or were you finally allowed to go ashore after all this time?
Oh, we went ashore because, of course, we knew people. We'd been there the year before.
How were you received by the population?
Oh, very well. Because after all, they'd been hearing rumours that we were coming and we'd eventually come. They knew that they would get some more food. But what they didn't know, and what we didn't know, is that we would be there for 17 weeks, by which time we had run out of food as well. And so we were getting rations back from the Maltese. And very often our meals would consist of 2 army biscuits and a slice of corned beef or something like that. We were down to the bottom of everything. One thing I can remember was when a relief convoy did get in, there was great joy because look what we'd got. We'd got supplies all the way from America. The only trouble was that one of the boxes contained dehydrated potatoes, and the advice was to put X gallons of water and several pounds of powdered milk and a pound or 2 of butter. Well, since we had no powdered milk and no butter, the resulting potatoes were pretty grim. I think army biscuits were preferable. But there we are. We eventually got out and got to Alexandria. And to our utter surprise, we were told to go to Durban, which we did, and we were then told to go to New York. So from Malta to New York, right round Africa, in the middle of a war. We went to New York and loaded a cargo of obviously important supplies, but not frozen meat. So at that time, the shortage of shipping was such that people were doing what they were told, that was all. So we came back across the Atlantic in a convoy, but there was a storm, and we were loaded with such extraordinary amounts of cargo. The ship suffered quite badly, quite a lot of damage. We got into Liverpool, the convoy having dispersed all over the place in the bad weather. We got into Liverpool, and the Marine superintendent came and said that they were so pleased that we had worked so hard to save the ship, which is a bit ridiculous really, because there are our own lives as well. That Lloyd had given us £500, and the company had decided to double it, so there was £1,000 to split among the crew. Of course, being an apprentice, I think my share was a £5, but then a £5 in those days was well worth having. The only thing I remember about the money, I suppose I was fortunate. When I first went to sea, there was a war bonus. It was £5 for men and £2.10, 10 shillings, for boys. But after a very short while, it went up to £10 for men and £5 for boys. So I went from £2, 10 shillings to £5, but then I got to be 18, whereupon I got £10. So I went up the ladder reasonably quickly.
You talked about being a boy and being a man. Something that we've asked the other men we've interviewed is probably very obvious to you, but for the sake of the exhibition, I'd be interested to know the answer. How had your experience of going to sea and experiencing a pedestal, but also experiencing different countries, Argentina, the places that you've travelled to in the world, how had that changed you personally, your attitudes?
Oh, I don't know how it had changed me, but I can remember my sister saying, well, you've certainly changed. I also think she thought I changed for the better. But certainly she hadn't thought much of having a younger brother who was a bit of a nuisance. But I suppose the fact that I was out of her way. But yes, she thought it had improved me a bit. But I really, you really can't tell. You go and you accept what's there. Then at this stage, of course, having got home, apart from the few pound from the company, we heard that the government had decided that nobody need do 4 years before he got his second mates. That 3 years was enough, and you didn't have to be 20. You only had to be 19. So there were 4 of us in the half deck, and the marine super lined us up, and he said to the senior apprentice, "You have finished your time. You are to go and sit for your second mate certificate." And he turned to the other 3 and he said, "I really don't understand this new regulation, but I believe you can sit for your certificates," which had us really rocking on our heels. Go home and put your papers in. If they accept your papers, sit for your exams. Well, we were thinking we've got to do another year before we sat the exams. But that was it. We came home and I went to the college and said, "I want to sit for my second mates." And they said, "What? Don't be silly. You just left." And some new regulation, don't understand it, but I've been told to put my papers in. So I put my papers in and I was told, yes, you can sit. So that was that. But of course we had to get the time in to make up for our mates. I then joined a ship called the Port Fairy. Now with a stripe on my arm, I was 4th officer, and we were loading for South America, which was unusual for Port Line again, except that I'd already been to South America twice. Now I was going for a 3rd time. We were told that we were going as a single ship, and we started off, and we were told to return, and everybody moaned because superstition has very harsh things to say about turning back. We turned back and we joined a convoy of 2 quite large liners. The Duchess of York, which was Canadian Pacific, and the California, which was Anchor Donaldson, I think. And they were loaded with troops and civilians, and we just had cargo outward bound. But instead of us being by ourselves and them with an escort behind us, we had to fall back and get in with them. And we did, and we were going down, I suppose you can say, in the direction of the Azores, when we were sighted by a Focke-Wulf Condor, one of the 4-engine bombers that they had patrolling out in the Atlantic. And another one appeared and an attack developed. They were high-level bombers, not very high, I suppose, by today's standards, but high by the standards of the day, some 18,000 to 20,000 feet high, so that nobody, not even the escort, had got anything that would fire that far up in the air. And they proceeded to bomb us from a great height, and they hit both the passenger ships, set them on fire, stopped them, and there was nothing could be done. They missed us, fortunately, possibly because the captain had been R&R during the First World War, and was, as a single ship, he was able to take some evading action. But when it was all over, we went back. We picked up some survivors. The naval escort picked up the rest. And we were told to proceed. But the next night, they came back, which of course is a bit disconcerting, because when there's only one ship left and they've come back, then they know who they've come back for. My action station was on the bridge, and the gunner, who knew his gun was useless, came up with a pair of binoculars and lay down on the wing of the bridge, lay on his back with the binoculars, and he watched as these came in, and he could actually see the glint of the sun on the bombs as they came out of the aircraft. And as soon as he saw them come out, he called to the captain, who then said to the man at the wheel, hard a starboard or hard a port, whichever way he thought, and then he would say to me, stop starboard, and we'd stop one engine and come round on the other one in an effort to say, well, if they've got it right up there, thinking we're going to be that much ahead, then we're going to be that much to one side. They certainly had some wonderful bomb sites, because they got so close to us that at one time we were ankle deep in water on the bridge. And eventually they got one bomb hit us right down aft, went into the shelter deck, blew the side of the ship out, set fire to all sorts of things that were stowed in the lazarette. We stopped the ship, got the fire hoses going, couldn't get down inside for smoke, so the lads rigged painting stages over the side and went over the side and got the hoses in. And we had one escort. By that time everybody else had taken survivors back to Gibraltar, and this one escort came alongside and said, I can offer you some colossal number of thousands of tons of water, because as I say, the Navy had other ideas about this sort of thing, and so we literally knocked this fire out with the Navy's high pressure hose as well as our own, and as the steering gear was electric, we stopped the steering gear as well. So luckily the rudder jammed amidships, and we went to Casablanca steering with the engines, which is not too difficult once you get the hang of it. And we laid in Casablanca, and which was held by the Americans at the time, and the Americans patched us up, and we went on down to South America, where Lloyd Surveyor didn't think much of the Americans' patch, so he had us patched up again. and we loaded the cargo and came home, which was the beginning of another lot of excitement, because several of the people were told,
We cut. I have to cut.
Before we get the next off,
Just cut. Is there somewhere would you like to naturally conclude it at this stage? Perhaps
you'd better know the next bit,
Yes. So would that be a good
Because-
piece to get to?
after the next bit,
Yes.
the war was practically over at sea,
Okay.
right? Certainly on this side.
Are you okay? Alex, sorry to have stopped you there. You were going to tell us about your next voyage to sea.
Yes, well, when we got back from the port ferry, a number of people, some of the engineer officers, the deck officers, were given very curious instructions. Pack your bags and go home, but be ready. We said, ready for what? And they said, oh, you'll find out. And so came home to Southampton and was duly ready, and was told to report to the company's office in London. Well, the company's office in London had been abandoned during the Blitz. They'd gone out to Leatherhead. But we duly went to the office, and bags and baggage, and met other people. And what instructions had they got? Well, I'd been fourth mate of the Port Fairy. I was now referred to as the third mate. There was another fellow there who said he'd been a third mate, but he was now referred to as the second mate. And the second mate of the Port Fairy, he was there, except that he was referred to as the mate. And the engineers were completely bewildered because their instructions were also upside down with care. But an official appeared and said, right, everybody round to Dock Street shipping office. And we went and we signed on for an unnamed ship. And then it was back to the office, get your bags, taxis will appear. And taxis did appear, even at that stage of the war. And we all went off to Euston Station, where we realized that there were hundreds of merchant seamen. There were people from all the companies you can think of. And we all piled into a special train, and we duly went north. Everybody had got his own idea about what was happening. And by next morning, we'd arrived at the Clyde, and we had a cup of tea and a bun, and got on board a tender and went out into the fog, and found we'd joined the Queen Elizabeth, which at that time was running thousands of Americans across and going back empty. Except on this occasion, it went back with several hundred merchant seamen of all ranks. Some of them, on arrival at New York, which took about 4 days, but some of them on arrival at New York got in trains and went across to the Pacific Ocean. I went as far as 42nd Street, New York, where I was with others, were put in the Wentworth Hotel. I rang up my aunt, who lived at Wyckoff, New Jersey, and said, I'm in the Wentworth Hotel, and she said, right, I'll come and get you, and you can come out with us for the weekend. And so I spent a few weekends out there. We got about $1 a day. Not quite sure what we were supposed to do with it. They called it pin money, I think. which we were in, but all meals in the hotel. We waited there, I think, for 4 weeks. Then the captain appeared and said, "They've started building our ship." And 3 weeks later, we went to sea on it. It was one of the Liberty ships. We piled into a train and we went down to there, forgotten where we went.
Hoboken?
No, down past Washington,
Oh,
down,
Charlotte, North Carolina?
not as far down as that.
Norfolk Road?
Bethlehem Steel Company.
Norfolk?
I think it's close to Norfolk, but Bethlehem Steel.
St Jamestown or something? No, not that area.
Yes, it is that area. Yes.
One new shipyard there, didn't they?
Pardon?
They built a special shipyard there, didn't they?
Yes, and again, they built special shipyards out there on the Pacific coast, and some of them had gone across by train to pick them up out there. At any rate, lo and behold, we were there. I was third mate of a Liberty ship. They were simple. They had 2 boilers. They had 1 engine, a steam engine. So all you needed to do was turn the oil on and light it, and there was nothing that people didn't understand. On deck, you had a magnetic compass, and a steering wheel, a chronometer, and your own sextant. So there was nothing more you wanted. I mean, there wasn't anything else. It was pretty bare, but there we were, and there were thousands of these were built, so many that the Americans couldn't man them, and we needed them, and so they gave us 350, I think. And they were all called Sam. Ours was the Sam Eden. And it was lease lend, and the Americans wanted us to do 1 voyage for them, and then they didn't want the ship back. If it did 1 voyage, that was their attitude to ships at that time. If the ship delivered a cargo, then it had served its worth. That was that. So if we delivered a cargo for them, then it was ours. And we loaded a cargo of mostly cased lorries, because at that time the Italian campaign was up just north of Naples, and the easiest way of getting mechanical transport out there was to send it out in cases and get it built in Naples. And this was largely what we took out to Naples. We were then told to wait because they were thinking of reinforcing Anzio, which was a beachhead. But nothing happened as far as we were concerned. And we went back across the Atlantic, reported back to New York. They said that was it. And we went to Trujillo, which is in the Dominican Republic. Discharged our, we had nothing to discharge, but we were cleaned up and inspected, and we went round to a port called Barahona, where we loaded sugar in bags. And we loaded a full cargo of sugar, which must have been about 10,000 tons. But it was brown, raw sugar, and it just reeked of molasses. And so we carted that up to New York, where we joined a convoy and then came across. But I know as third mate I had a terrible struggle, because although was used to keeping station outward bound to Italy and homeward bound flying light, with this full cargo of sugar, if you dropped behind a bit, you had to push the revs up to get it going again, and once you got it going, you could take the revs off, but it wouldn't stop. At least that was my opinion. But there we are.